sometimes what they call a glass. In France they call it a barine. And what I'm going to put into that is smoked chicken, smoked bacon, asparagus, and really produce that as a simple little starter. It's got cream cheese and double cream in it. So we'll get that started, and then the second part is a rack of lamb with a beetroot sauce, spicy beetroot sauce, some carrots and some potatoes. And interspersed between that we have Joe hosting the proceedings and Alistair doing the wine. I believe we have the wine producer all the way from the other side of the world.
From the Margaret River, we've got Charmaine Saw from Yamama Estate here as well today, fortunately. So Charmaine can maybe say a few words. I'll talk about the wines, and I should have enough to give some people a taste of their fantastic wines as well.
Okay.
Hooray!
So I'll get on quickly with the smoked chicken. So the oven is on, and we need to get the carrots on. Under the rubber glove being burnt to my hand at this rate.
So Paul, sorry, because I was fraternising with Gary earlier on. I don't know if you've already mentioned the fact that when you come into the studio every month, it's very much the focus on seasonal and local produce.
Yeah.
Always bring us some great new producers and names and places to visit.
Well, I do my best.
You do a good job of it.
I do my best. Yeah, I mean, today it's a bit of asparagus, which is from Beechcroft farm at Abingdon. Some local bacon, and we've got what else we've got? The chicken, which is local, but that's just been smoked. A bit of juniper and rosemary. And then the lamb, again, that's local from Cheap Road, just down the Newbury way. So again, trying to use as much as possible. Interesting.
A little freezer.
Yes, a little freezer. So we'll try and get this on the go now. I'm not smoking. Right, so we'll just chop this up. And this is part of the reason for the food festival is actually the amount of good producers that exist in this part of the world. It's not to say there aren't good producers all over the country, but I think, as Gary said earlier, there are just so many good producers, which make us, I think, as a country, getting better and more au fait and acquainted with our food. I think it behoves us, if we're going to get into food, we need to make sure we're using local ingredients as far as possible, because sustainably it's not great to be using food from halfway around the world when you can actually get it locally. So that's why the food festival came about last year, and we're here now.
So that's chicken breast that you're just cutting up now?
Yeah, just dicing up as fine as
and that's
I can.
already smoked?
It's already smoked, yes.
And how do you go about smoking your chicken breast at home, Paul?
Well, my other half is saving metal tins with the desire to actually make a little smoker.
Yeah.
You can make it out of anything. A couple of tins and use the bases to create the fire with the wood chippings, whatever particular wood chippings you want to use. And use the top tin with a rack, and you can put your meat in there and smoke it. We went down to Charmouth and we stayed at a small little hotel, and the guy had made a smoker out of a chimney, and he was using that to smoke basically all the meats that he was interested in, from duck to what have you, chicken and so on. So you can really do it whichever way you want, or you can go and spend some money and buy a really good one and see how you get on with that. But, there are plenty of books out there as well to try. So yeah, go and do it. It's quite a lot of fun, I think, for just using some local produce and doing something a bit different with it.
But what would you smoke? What do you light underneath? You like twigs or?
Yeah, you just get the chippings. Essentially, the chippings, dry chippings of whatever wood you want, whether it's apple wood or oak or whatever you happen to, juniper or whatever it happens to be, and just let that smoke and smoulder away, and then just cover it and leave it for however long you need to leave it, the thicker the piece of meat, the longer you need to smoke it for to get the flavour through, and also to essentially cook it in that condition.
that bacon there, you just
Again, that's just literally dry fried. It's just some oak smoked bacon, just dry fried. So what we'll do is we'll pop that. This is the bit you don't see, because I don't do this bit.
No.
So you just get the.
I just get the delicious meals.
Okay, so the next bit is wrap it onto there. Excuse me while I'm doing this. This needs to go on.
Now, when's lamb at its best?
It's pretty much. I mean, obviously, there's the early part of the season now where lambs just come through this, so there's a good supply of but you can generally tend to find it because obviously with people with good freezers and meat suppliers with good freezers can keep the meat a bit longer as well. So it tends to be available more often around the year. But obviously, as the lambing has just gone through, then you're starting to get into the period of fresh lamb now. Right, so I just need to do a little salt and pepper on the top there. Not sure what that works. This one. Right then, so we'll get that in. That's on the way. Right, so the next part of this. Let's just let's have some cream cheese. And this is an organic cream cheese. So we need to put that.
So when you decided to set up as the late chef, I mean, straight away from the word go, you must have known that your producers were going to be key to what you were going to be able to offer.
It's important, but the best way I found to find producers was to go to the local market and actually participate in the market. And that way you actually got to meet. And that's how I met Cooper's with the Oxford pork. There's some great meat there, so some fantastic job they're doing with the herb there. Some of the veg suppliers and so on. It's the only really way to go out and find these producers is to go to the local markets.
I guess talking to producers as well, you were hearing earlier on, because of the slightly odd spring we had in terms of asparagus, you learned what's really bumper of a year, what's maybe a little harder to come by or not as good, and you can really sort of feel your way through the culinary year.
Yes. I mean, the interesting thing as well though is that there's more and more producers are now able to do a lot more with what they have. We take the Spring Hill project. I'm using their beetroot as Gary used for his terrine. The things that they are doing there are absolutely fantastic, and I went and had a look at it the other day, and you just look at the land they've got, Old Victorian Wall Garden, and the polytunnels and everything else that they've built. It's just absolutely fantastic. And they're growing in the polytunnels things like courgettes, they've already cropped some of those, the spinach, they've now got red peppers and chilies in there. So there's a fantastic range of things that they're doing. And I think that's quite an inspiring thing when you see what they're doing over there with what they've bought. There's a lot of veg, good produce to be able to have. Right. Okie dokie. So that's the chicken. I need that bit later, so let's blitz this up. So that's a bit of cream cheese and some double cream that's gone in there. Let's pop a little bit of salt. A little bit of pepper.
And with a lot of the local producers as well, to us it'd be lovely to be able to raise all our own meat and grow all our own vegetables. It's just not viable. By utilising each other, it sort of just keeps the industry going, doesn't it? And helps support everybody.
It does, and I think the reality is that with what is available out there, connections are made. I mean, to see what's Gary's looked at picked up on the pork and the relationship they have with Spring Hill, and it's all come back down to being local. And I don't think you can beat that really for the food and everything else that we should be eating. It should be local. It shouldn't be coming from too far around the world. Right, so I'm going to pop a little bit of this mixture in here. Let's get that mixed up. I apologise, guys. You did have a chance to preview this the other week.
We don't apologise. It was delicious.
Right, so the idea behind these verrines, and the recipe is from a guy called Frank Pontes, who's based up in Suffolk, I believe, and he self-published a book called Verrines and Terrines, and there's some wonderful recipes in there, which, when you actually look at them, they're a sort of a shrunken down version of a main sort of dish, but encapsulated into a glass or into a small terrine, which actually make for an interesting starter or an interesting dessert. So some great recipes in there to try.
Now, Alistair, as we work on the show, when Paul says this is what I'm going to be cooking this week, like for instance now chicken and a bacon and an asparagus-based dish, do you know straight away what kind of wine's going to start matching with the food? What do you want to bring out from each dish?
I do, yeah. I have lots of thoughts. I get very excited, but
He gets very.
I get very, very excited. But Paul, I must say, asparagus is quite well known in the wine trade as being one of the most difficult things to pair with wine. So thank you, Paul, for the asparagus.
I like giving you a challenge, Alice.
But in all honesty, a lot of people do say that. But I enjoy a challenge. Thanks, Paul. And I think there are certain grapes that go very well with asparagus, and the obvious one that most people think of is Sauvignon Blanc, because there's something in asparagus, there's a chemical called pyrazine that you also find in Cabernet Sauvignon. It's sort of quite a green peppery element that comes out, and that also is very prevalent in Sauvignon Blanc, which you might have had some Sauvignons, be either from the Sancerre or from the Loire Valley, or maybe from New Zealand, where you get really quite pungent fruit flavours and almost asparagus-y. There are wines that actually smell and can taste quite asparagus-y, Sauvignon Blancs, especially from New Zealand. And I find actually that can be a little bit overt. If you have asparagus with that overt asparagus wine, it can just be a little bit too much. So I think Sauvignon is one of the right grapes to go with it, but Sauvignon that's not quite so overpowering, and that's why I think this is the perfect one. I think, who wouldn't like to try any? Who wouldn't, I said. Can't really I said that. Charmaine, would you like to hand some little samples out? And then I can, I say, this is Charmaine's wine from, if I give you the bottle and just give a few out to people.
There we go. That's smoked chicken and bacon in a cream cheese
Fantastic.
sauce with asparagus spears, tomato and thyme.
So what we have here is that this is the Umamu 2007 Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blend, which is a Bordeaux blend. It's traditional. In 1965, without going too technical, a man called Gladstone went to Margaret River, which is on the western side of Australia, and likened it, a viticulturalist likened it to Bordeaux, because they have a very similar climate. They're next to its maritime climate, and they have similar soil types, free draining gravel soil. So he decided that the right thing to do in that area was to plant grape varieties that you find in Bordeaux. So in the whites, that's Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, and in the reds, it's Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. So the red we've got is a Cab Sauv Merlot coming up after this. But what 2007 is, it's got a little bit of age, so we've got a 5-year-old wine here. But what they've done is there's a little bit of oak fermentation here. So about 10% of the wine has been fermented in oak, and what that does is it just adds a little bit of richness to the palate. You'll see by tasting this, there's a lot of lemon in there. It's quite lemony, it's quite citrusy. But there's also a sort of nuttiness coming through on the... You haven't got any yet, have you? You think, it's coming, it's coming.
Alistair, don't give any to her.
Also, Alistair, we were discussing that lemony, that citrusy, with something that's as creamy as this chicken. It cuts through it really nicely.
Exactly that. When you have something that's creamy, then that helps the asparagus, helps you pair it with the asparagus, because it takes away a bit of that overt greenness, pyrazine, from the asparagus. But this sort of citrusiness cuts through the creaminess and the smokiness as well. And it's got a slightly... There's a lot of acidity in there, but there's also some richness on the palate, which is coming from the oak aging, the 10% oak aging. It's coming round, I'm sure it's coming round to those that haven't got it. But this does work very well, because Any thoughts on this wine? Anyone who's got some, any thoughts on it? Can you see that it's quite citrusy?
You want to try some?
The nose is quite lemony.
It's cream cheese, organic cream. Just a little rapeseed oil, cold pressed rapeseed oil. You want to try some?
And it's that citrusiness that's going to cut really nicely through the creaminess of the cream cheese and the chicken.
I've got more spoons, so if anybody would like to pass it around.
It's very light, yet very fresh, isn't it? It's very summery to me. It's got exactly hot afternoon wine, perfect. And with that, so there is that touch of pyrozininess, you know, quite a technical, geeky word I'm getting into here, but it is a herbaceousness that you get from Sauvignon Blanc.
Sorry.
Charmaine, what would you, this is Charmaine whose wine it is, so what would you normally enjoy this with?
You know, to be perfectly honest, this is one of the first wines that we produce. And I remember trying all sorts of cuisine, from Thai, Japanese, Chinese, European, and the only thing I didn't find that went well with was deep fried Shanghaiese eel. So I find it a very versatile wine. It's always interesting to keep trying to find another one on food to pair it with.
Any thoughts on the wine? Anyone? Good. BB completely, you know, it's great to have, you know, we've all got different tastes with wine, and also when it comes to food and wine matching, I think some people in the wine industry get very snobby about the whole thing. You know, if you like a light piece of white fish with a Malbec, then go for it. You know, I wouldn't do it personally, but you know, we all have different tastes, and I think that you can get a little bit too caught up in trying to match things. I do it because I'm a wine geek. I love it. You know, I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking about what I'm eating in the evening, and then I think about what I'm drinking, and then about what I'm eating, and so it's always on my mind. But I'm the exception, I think, rather than the rule. But it's I think the one thing is, though, when you find a great food and wine pairing, it's really quite incredible. You can really heighten the fun and the flavour of the food. Simple things like goat's cheese and Sauvignon Blanc, you know. Often, if you go to a region, what they grow there, what they eat there, does go well with the local wine. It's just whatever grows together goes together. You know, so goat's cheese from Chavignon, Crottin de Chavignon in the Loire, in Sancerre, amazing with the wine. I mean, it is just the way it should be. And the same in regional cuisine, especially in Italy and France, just goes fantastically well with the local wines. Australian wines, what any opinions on Australian wines? A snapshot from anyone, what would you think about when I say Australian wines? Negative, positive? The reds are better? Yeah?
Fruity.
Very cheap.
Cheap and fruity.
Cheap and fruity, yeah. That's definitely something that has been... There's sunshine in a bottle was something that people said about Australian wines, but now what they're focusing on is the more premium regional wines, and there is certainly terroir and regionality in Australia, and Yamamu's is a great example of that in
Any thoughts on the wine going with the chicken?
I was going to say, well, I find it hard to drink on its own.
Yeah.
But it's perfect when you marry the two together.
A perfect...
Cuts through the creaminess of the...
It does, doesn't it? And how does it match with the asparagus? Yeah?
But if it's a wine I just couldn't drink.
On its own. I think it's quite... Yeah, it works well. That's the other thing with, you do hear people in the wine industry say a lot, it's a food wine. Now often that's a bit of a cop out. It means it's not such a great wine. And I think we've all been guilty of that occasionally, but I think really sometimes, certainly with red wines, because with red wines you have tannins, and the tannins that come from the skins and the pips of the grape, which is why red wine is red. It's not a silly thing, you know, I hope I'm not patronising anyone, but red wine is red. If you peel off the skin of a red grape, inside the flesh is white. The only reason a red wine is red is because it spends time sitting on the skins and it soaks all that colour up. That's where the maceration period brings out the colour. That's why red wine is red, not because of the pulp.
Question, so that's one of the first questions I ever asked you.
It's not silly, exactly. It's definitely not a silly question.
Definitely not a silly question.
It's not a silly question. I think certainly with red wines there is that tannin element, that tannins are tamed by protein, especially by red meat. So if people say it's a food red wine, and some quite tannic wines like Barolo from Italy or you know, a lot of Bordeaux as well can be tannic. Then pairing that with red meat really works. It does calm the tannins, and that's great. You know, to have something that you wouldn't necessarily like on its own, and then when you match it with the food, it can really change the experience.
Paul, your lamb is smelling extremely
It's doing its job, that's for sure. It'll be ready in about 10 minutes. Right, I've got some in this slightly disgusting looking jug. Beetroot in a sauce doesn't cover particularly well. I had fun making this. It's beetroot again from Spring Hill. They are fantastic. Absolutely fantastic, beautiful things. It's quite a simple sauce. Essentially, it's red wine vinegar, red wine, star anise, cumin, and some other spices. Basically, just I looked at the recipe that inspired me to do it, but it said wrap the beetroots individually with the spices, and I tried doing that. Of course, it leaked everywhere inside the pan, so I thought, forget that. Just put them in the pan, cover them with in a dish, a big dish, cover them with the sort of the liquid and the spices, and roast them for an hour or so, which is what I did. And then you end up with soft beetroot, but then you've got to go through the fun bit of going through and blitzing them. It looked like something had died rather messily in the kitchen by the time I'd finished with it, but there we go. But you then have to go through a process of straining it 2 or 3 times. I'll try and get this so you can see. You end up with that sort of deep, wonderful colour, and it's actually pretty clear as well. That's been strained about 4 times. So you get that.
The colour's amazing, isn't it?
It is. Well, you remember I did the poached pear in beetroot. I did that.
Yes, Paul.
Yes, thank you. That was the right answer. You're just not quick enough, Alice. Yeah, no, I do a poached pear, which is poached.
No, you've never done that.
Oh, haven't I?
He has. I just wanted to do it again.
You must have had a day off. So yeah, that poach the pear in the beetroot sauce and beetroot liquid, and it looks absolutely fantastic. Then distill it down, and you can just use that as a get it to a lovely sort of thin oil, and it looks beautiful when it's presented on the plate. So I have to brave myself with this thing again. So that works. So I just want to bring that up to a little bit of a boil. So the simple thing with the rack of lamb, this one has been French trimmed. Does anybody know what French trimmed is?
The best bits off. Yes.
Cut the best bits off. Yes, that's one way.
Do we keep them or throw them away?
Right, so basically what they do is they take the rack and take the top bit off, so you can then have your soldiers standing up, as it were, or you turn it into a crown roast as well by joining a couple together, sewing a couple together. So yeah, they just basically take the knife and shave off all the fatty bits and the meat close to the bone, but you end up with something like that. So this is a nice simple one in terms of cooking. I like doing a rack of lamb, but you actually take the skin and the fat off, and then you replace that with a crust, either a minted crust or a Maillard crust with onion and various other spices and herbs in there as well, which is quite a nice one to do. But we're using that today, thanks to Sheep Grove, which is really good. So again, with the lamb, it's just a question of getting it ready, popping it in the oven. And we've had that going for about 10 minutes on 230, and then drop it down for another 10 minutes to 200, and then we'll take it out and we'll rest it on the plate there when it's ready.
Paul, you didn't, I don't think I saw you browning off the fat. Would you normally do that, or no, you don't need to?
No, you just go straight in as is.
Okay,
I've not sealed it. No, it goes straight in on the hottest oven you can get, because then with the oven being hot, that'll seal the skin. Yeah, that'll seal it. With a bit of salt and pepper on the top, that'll seal it at that high heat for 10 minutes, and then that'll seal it in. So I'm just getting the beetroot up to a little bit warmer, and then hopefully, again, something simple but something a bit different. As I say, the beetroot sauce is an easy one to make. It's just obviously just be prepared to sort of retain the mess in the bowl if you can, because it's not always easy. So I'll check it a bit. Okay, so Right, so that's the beetroot sauce coming up. Give that another 5 minutes and then we're ready. And then I'm just going to take those off. Yeah, that does work. That's running through.
So Paul, sort of in the reverse of the question I asked Alistair, when you're working with a client and you're putting a menu together, at what point do the wine choices or the options sort of raise their head as a subject?
Sometimes it's the first choice. Quite a lot of the time what they're going to drink is the first one. Yeah. Again, it's once you start really getting into what the starters and the main courses are going to be, and they've agreed whether it's a meat or a fish or...
And working through the menu as well is important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You have to have some thread that'll take you through the different dishes?
It depends. I mean, I've recently just sort of been working with a client who's got an event in November and they want a sort of a Cayley style party, so, but it's not like a 3-course dinner, it's a set of different foods. So somewhere in there I've got to squeeze the haggis dish, which would be quite interesting, and maybe some meats and some tatties as well to go in, and and maybe a bit of Kilcannon or something else, just to keep the Scottish flavour going. But other than that, she's kind of left me to do. She's agreed most of it, but she kind of left me to do most of the suggestions. But she just wants a little Scottish element in there as well.
So challenge for you. It's what you live for, isn't it?
It's all part of the fun. It's all part of the fun. Right, so let's see if I can get this one lit as well. That's what I love about doing this cooking. There's always never enough space. That's that one.
That smells so good.
What I'm going to do is just put a little bit of butter in. And we'll just finish off these carrots. And I hope what we'll do is, I don't know if anybody's mentioned it, the recipes we'll get up onto the Food Festival website so that everybody can actually try them for themselves at home. So you should be able to go to www.wallingfordfoodfestival.co.uk probably tomorrow afternoon or Monday morning, and all the recipes should be up there with a bit of luck. If not, some of them will be. We'll get them on there as we go.
I'm just going to ask everyone here a question with bringing it back to wine. Who here, when they're having a meal, who really thinks about what wine they're going to have with the meal? How does anyone? Do you think? Does it play any decision in? Do you think about it? Anyone? Is it something that's important? No one.
I think about the meal I'm having with the wine.
You think the meal you're having with the wine?
The food.
So, okay, the wine comes first for you. Okay. Anyone else, for when they're having a meal, they will think. They'll look at a bottle of wine and say, okay, that's what I'm having, what am I going to eat? No, I've got that. Anyone?
I think when we've got doing a dinner party,
Have you? Yeah.
perfectly fine.
No.
Literally, it would just be what we actually had.
Yeah.
I mean, does anybody drink every night a meal?
No.
Confessions.
I don't think that happens, does it?
I don't know.
Not to everybody, anyway.
Not probably. No, not to everyone.
So like the lady says about a dinner party.
Yeah.
When your friends round.
Sure.
But you do think then that you're going somewhere.
Has anyone had a food and wine matching thing where they've thought, wow, that's great, that really works?
Yeah.
Yeah? So lots of people haven't had that epiphany. It's interesting. Yeah, you have had it. Do you remember what it was? That is several times. It's interesting, I'm really, as I said earlier, I think a lot of people in the wine trade, it can be a bit snobby, it can be a bit stuffy, it can be a bit have this with that, and that's what you should be doing, because as with cooking, there are no rules. If you like it, then that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's right. There shouldn't be someone saying this is what you should do.